as someone who's attended thousands of births. And the thing is that for a woman giving birth, the main thing that she needs to feel is a sense of safety. You don't need to prepare. Birth is designed really just to happen.
Just curious, is orgasmic birth an actual thing?
Orgasmic birth and orgasm, yeah.
Sitting up versus laying down.
So some of the reasons physiologically that you don't want to be on your back is your pelvis is 30% smaller. Why do some people get pregnant and other people that have planned it so much aren't able to?
Hey guys, so welcome to another episode of the Mind Body Mastery Podcast, and I'm your host, Mike Chang, and we're here with Stephen Yeh, and our special guest for today, my personal midwife that delivered my last child. And we invited her to come chat about everything from conscious birthing to sharing the experience of how that was like in our own delivery to that industry of birthing, how it all works and what we need to do to really prepare to raise good children, for the future. So we have our guest here, Lianne. Lianne, thank you for joining us. Tell us a little bit about what you do, because we talk about conscious birthing, midwifing. Share a little bit about what you do and your experience in that.
Great, yeah. Thanks for having me here today. It's exciting always for me to talk about birth and preparation for birth and all things around that, because it's something that I find really is at the foundation of our world. All of us are born. It's something that we all have in common, and it impacts us. And from my own experience, I got into this 28 years ago. And one of the reasons I got into it is just for that reason, because I find that we all have different motivations for creating change in our life, but pregnancy is one of those times when there's such a big motivation to actually create change. And it was something when I first got into this all those years ago, was that really seeing that it's this fulcrum moment for transformation. And really that's why I'm still passionate about it now.
How'd you get into it?
Well, actually, when I was 8 years old, my little sister was born. She was born in our own home. And during the pregnancy, I had read this book that had come out, I think around that time, called Spiritual Midwifery, that my parents had. So my parents had chosen to have her at home. And when I was reading this book, I just said, I'm going to be a midwife one day. And so it was it wasn't that I went on a direct path, because I think often it's not a direct path, something like that. Like my sort of vision for it was being at the time was this sort of village healer, midwife, caring for everyone, herbalist. And so I did do other things, counseling and different healing practices and herbalism and all sorts of things on the pathway to becoming a midwife, becoming a doula, and then finished my midwifery 20 some years ago. So yeah, it's been a long passion that's been brewing. It really started with that excitement of seeing my little sister born at home.
Was it like seeing how interesting it was, and you said, I want to do that because it's super cool, or was it like a scary experience? You're like, oh my God, like I want to grow up and do this so I can make the experience better. What was it about the experience that got you to be excited about it? Because I've never heard anybody who's like, a child, right? Most time the whole idea of sex and birthing, it's like, parents make up all these things around it, so kids don't even know, like, where do babies come from? And you're 8 years old and you're like, I'm going to not only know and understand how it all works, but I'm going to do this for the future. Like, what happened and that got you to want to do that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And what comes to mind is this moment after my little sister was born, and my parents did something called a laboyer birth, which one of the small things of that is you give the baby a warm bath afterwards. And I just remember her being so relaxed. So it was like she's literally just born, she's born whatever it was an hour before. And she was just so relaxed, just looking around at us. And, you know how babies are after a gentle birth. They're so calm. And I remember her just looking right into my eyes. And I was, poking my little tongue out at her, and she was doing it back. And she was literally an hour old, and I could see she was absolutely conscious, completely aware. And it was like, okay, there was just something in that just seeing, like, she's not a baby. It was like, even at my 8-year-old self, I think I had that concept that a baby is not aware, or not, they're just a baby. They don't really know. And
Right.
I could see how aware she was in that moment. Like, she was just like me, she was perfectly whole as a being, perfectly aware, perfectly there. So that's what captured me, actually.
So you're 8 years old, like throughout your childhood and your teenage years, was this always consciously in your mind that you were going towards this path, or did it hit you in that moment and then over time, you're just a kid doing your thing? And
Yeah. A little bit of both, there was a little bit, it was always in the back of my mind, but I know at one point, like, I was a competitive gymnast. So then I decided I was going to do sports psychology, for example, at one point, so I had different things that I came in and out of, but it was always sort of there in the back of my mind. And then, decided to become a doula and breastfeeding counselor, and then had my own child at home, when I was young. And so all of those things sort of kept clarifying it. It was there, but then, different things came in and out, but it felt also like, when life kind of keeps clarifying something, sometimes life takes you further away. This felt like life was bringing me into this direction more and more. And but definitely it wasn't perfectly linear. It was one.
And you've been in this journey for 28 years?
Yeah.
It's a long time. How do you still feel about it? Is it you still learning, or?
I think that one thing I love about this whole realm of, whether it's preconception, pregnancy, birth, parenting, is it never gets dull, because it's you never know what's going to happen with it. But also what I find is the same things that I work with when preparing for birth, or even preparing for conception, for parents that come that want to prepare for conceiving a child, are exactly the same things that I do when I'm working with somebody who's 65 years old, or a teenager. It's all the same inner work to really clarify or connect people to their own essence. And so it never gets old. And for me, having that connected to birth, because birth is such an important moment in life on so many different levels, which I can talk about more. So there's just something really powerful there for me.
If there was one thing that you would say is like the most important to know about birthing, for, let's say, somebody that hasn't had a child yet, or is going to have another one, what would you say that one thing is?
I think it is to bring as much conscious and awareness to the whole process as possible. And that doesn't mean obsessing over knowledge. So it's not about, you have to just learn everything, because birth doesn't happen in the mind. You can have all the knowledge in the world, but your body is still what has to actually do the birthing process. But it's to really become conscious of who you are as a mother who's going to birth, but also as the whole family ecosystem, and become conscious and aware in that process. Because often we live our lives, I guess unconsciously is the best way to put it, that we're just living life is just happening, and there's no moment to actually pause and be present with what is. And then birth becomes that moment, because birth brings you into presence, right? You cannot be not present when you're birthing. It's very there, and you don't know exactly what's going to happen in the birth. It's always uncertain. It's always going to be something new. Even if you've had, like, I've midwifed people who have had 6 or 7 babies before. It's still different when they have another baby. So you can't know what's going to happen, but you can be in that deep awareness. And in that space of awareness, there could be things, for example, that you realize, okay, this needs to change, or this needs to transform in my life. And then there might be specific things that need to happen. But for me, it starts with, are you actually aware in your own life? Are you conscious in this process? Or are you just so busy and caught up with life that you're just going to go, and then it's just another day, and you birth, and that happens, and then you parent, and there's no moment of actually creating that process, or even choosing who you want to be in that process.
When you say be aware of who you are, because birth doesn't happen in the mind, the body has to go through it. Are you saying that for, like, a person to connect deeper to their body, or what does it mean like to be aware of like who I am? Like, you know, I'm a doctor, I'm a marketer, I'm a this. Can you elaborate more on that?
Yeah, that's good, because I hear myself say who I am, and I have my own feeling about it. But yeah, it's not the roles. It is that combination of the embodied self. So the actual physical, like what's actually happening in my body, like right now. There's what my mind is thinking, I'm answering your questions, and then there's what my body is experiencing, which is connected to that, but something different. So some of it is very physical. Like, am I actually connected to what my body is feeling right now? And then some of it is that sense of who are you beyond any roles. So, I'm a mother, I'm a midwife, I'm this, I'm that, but who am I? There's a me that isn't any of those roles. And the more the people that I work with get in touch, and I get in touch with that essence of like, who am I past all of those roles? Then there's almost that space of silence. And in that beingness, that indescribable place that's hard to put words to, and it's that is what I would call awareness, that leads to I'm connected to my body and I can birth, for example, or I realize, I need to do more practical preparation for my birth, or I realize I need more support in that process. But it starts with the being, like the me that's not any of the roles, that's in this physical body, but is more than this physical body. And some of that is intangible. It's hard to put words to, but a lot of people know when they experience it, even if they can't put words to it. When they're just in that flow of life. And there are lots of practices, like very practical practices, to help find that place that's both flowing and embodied at the same time.
And what would you say, what happens to a person if they're birthing and they weren't connected to their body, they didn't understand who they really were? What's the type of things that they would expect?
Well, there's two things. So I think one is that the body is always preparing for birth from the moment of conception. So on one hand, there's nothing anyone needs to do to prepare. It's really like your body is preparing you. Your mind is preparing, even hormones, the hormones change a person's mind and how the mind, even literally how the brain is structured, but also how the mind works, the things that they're interested in. So that process is happening. So I always am careful talking about it, because on one hand, you don't need to prepare. Birth is designed really just to happen in that way. The challenge is that almost everyone has grown up with or experienced either traumatic events or challenges, or they become disconnected for them, their mind and their body are disconnected for different reasons, or they're not feeling supported in their life, so those hormones don't flow properly. So it's not that there's something wrong with the body and we have to fix it by preparing. We have to get the body and the mind back into sync and to its own flow, which is how it's designed to be, right? It is designed to just happen naturally. So the things that can happen when that is all out of sync, that there isn't the support to come into presence, and they haven't been living, because someone living a totally natural life out in the woods with they've never seen a Hollywood movie that scared them. They've never had a negative experience. They're going to birth beautifully, honestly, because there's nothing in the way. The body is designed to do that, like every other process of our human selves. But most of us, that's not the reality. So basically what we see in our world at the moment, which is like 30% plus have women have a surgical birth. The baby is born by cesarean, which is occasionally life-saving. And, it's amazing to have that technology, often very traumatic for mother and baby. And we know not necessarily leading to better outcomes. Very few families experience a perfectly normal birth. And the thing is that birth is not just about the birth. So much research that we have that shows that what happens really from conception, but especially right around the time of birth, impacts the baby, it impacts the mother, it impacts the father, it impacts the entire family. Even, generationally, it impacts what happens at that birth. And so we're looking at, we're going, okay, that's going to be a few hours a day or 2 days, but it isn't. It's so much more than that because it's a primary imprinting experience on the baby and on parents. And so you're meeting your baby for the first time, either, for example, with bright lights and noises and being disrupted, or something very calm and connected and loving. That's going to give a very different imprinting for the baby, but also the parents and other siblings, depending on the context of that. Or is the baby born into this gentleness and love, or were they born into trauma and pain and intervention, and which creates its own extra trauma? So whenever I'm talking about the birth, it isn't really birth. It's birth, but it's actually all of life, because even crazy things like they've linked certain interventions or certain drugs given during the labor with higher likelihood of different violent things happening later in life, like violent suicide. And it's not that obviously it's not a causation, but there's some correlation between traumas that happen during birth and addictions later, and very big traumatic events later in life.
Why is that?
The theory is because of imprinting. So, for example, certain drugs that the baby gets during pregnancy, so this is all theoretical, but it appears that the imprinting is, for example, it's intense for the baby. Then they get, say, opioids. So they get a stream of opioids that makes their brain get that particular way of feeling better. And so that becomes an imprinting of, okay, when you're in this primary painful experience, often the first time the baby's maybe felt that kind of intensity, then they get opioids. Then if they're exposed to that or certain other life events happen later, they're more likely to become addicted. To seek that same kind of, because their brain has had the primary experience or imprinting of opioids there. There's some link to opioids later on. And those are really extreme examples, but it just goes to, because it's hard to research the more subtle things. It's really hard to, how do you research this sort of subtle event happening at the birth versus that subtle event? So the only thing that can be researched are these more sort of harder outcomes that you can look at. So it would be that's a rare thing, but some of the statistics are quite strong, like 700% increase in opioid addictions, for example. They're very strong correlations. Again, not causation, but saying, okay, this looks like that impacts what happens later in life. Mm-hmm. Also, there's more and more research around just birth trauma and how that impacts babies, how, sort of lifelong, unless something's done to help with that. Even things like when, say, women don't have enough nutrition during pregnancy, say there's a famine or something in a country where this has been studied countrywide, then that impacts even things like blood pressure in late life in those babies that were in the womb. And that's a very physical marker, but more and more we know that it's not just the physical markers, it's emotional and energetic things that also affect the epigenetics in the body. So the physical way our cells, how they express themselves throughout our life, gets impacted by physical factors, by emotional factors, by all sorts of factors in our life.
So would you say, if I was to sum that up, what happens at birth to a baby, it carries over into their adult life, and if it was violent or if it was scary, then they tend to have more of those tendencies. If they were experiencing pain and then they got this thing as a way to make the pain feel better, then in their adult life, whenever they're experiencing challenges, they may seek similar type of ways to cope with the pain. And then that leads to where we see modern day people are addicted to this, addicted to that. And it's so hard to overcome the habits, and people don't understand why. And it could, like you mentioned, not a direct correlation, not a direct causation, but there's correlations. If this happens, there's higher percentages of that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I was just thinking, when I started first learning about this, before Riza was born. Riza's almost 3 now, and before he was born, I didn't know much of any of this, and I remember starting to learn about the process, learning about why you need to breastfeed, and understanding about what's in the baby formula. It's like, I don't know back in the day. And then as I started to dive into it, I remember my mom telling me, we had conversations on this, my mom and I, but she didn't have any breast milk.
Mm.
So my sister had a little bit of breast milk when she was born, and then formula. My mom said I was like formula on day 1.
Mm.
And throughout my life, especially in my younger days, but even now, I've got a massive, massive sweet tooth.
Mm.
I mean, I can just put down godly amounts of sweets to where it's just something's wrong with you. Like I eat a whole cake and I can just keep eating.
Mm-hmm.
Tubs of ice cream. I used to do it as a kid. Tubs of ice cream. Even now, I would control it because I need to, but I sometimes will sit there and I can just put it down until I go sick in my stomach. And, we just call it, oh, you have a sweet tooth. Right. But most people don't really look at, why is my sweet tooth so big?
Mm-hmm.
And I think I don't have the studies. People always go, well, where are the studies and the science? But what is a fact is that from day 1, when I was able to put anything into this system, it was pretty much what they have in formulas. And I don't know the details, and you may know, but I just know it's not good, and it's just junk compared to real breast milk, what babies are supposed to be drinking or having.
Yeah. And of course, again, it's like we're grateful to have that, to be able to have something, on those very rare occasions, but it is essentially sugar being put into the body, which is not the kind of sugar that the human body is designed for. So yeah,
Wow.
Yeah, makes sense.
So what about men? Because that was something else that I learned. A lot of times for men, they think, well, we're gonna have a baby. Great. All right. My wife, let's go ahead and prepare. I'm just gonna prepare to have a baby in the life, but you prepare everything else, right? It's your job. And I started to learn that wasn't really the case. Can you elaborate on that? Like, what do men need to do to prepare for birth, support the wife, things like that?
It's actually one of my favorite subjects. I think because, there's more and more out there now about women preparing for birth.
Yeah.
It's still growing, this idea that men need to prepare. And, the best way I can describe it is like this. So, because men often feel like, what's my role? Like, really, what's my role? And on one level, of course, you guys know, she has to do it. You can't do it for her. There's nothing you can do that's going to do the work for her. But the key is that our bodies are still the same now as they were when we were cave people, right? So when we were cave people, you guys would have been standing at the front of the cave while she's birthing right there. And what's happening is you're scanning the environment. Is it safe? And your body is signaling. It's so fast, like way before you could talk or say, watch out. Your body would signal there's danger or everything's safe. The thing is that the body is still the same now, right? So you're in the birth space as a father, and her body is still watching. It's like literally pinging off you, signaling. She's going, is it safe? And your body's signaling back, yes, it's safe. Or your body is signaling back, no, it's not safe. And the thing is that for a woman giving birth, the main thing that she needs to feel is a sense of safety. And that makes sense, right? Because if you're not safe, why would you give birth to an infant? Like, your body would just stop the process. Like every mammal, you think of cats. If a cat gets disturbed giving birth, it stops the process, right? That's why they go hide away. So every mammal is the same. Our bodies are the same, exactly the same. We have to feel safe. But the biggest person that we're sort of finding that safety outside of ourselves is the father of our baby, or hopefully our partner, who's there. And so actually your role is so important, in bringing that safety, that external safety. So she has her own internal safety, but what you can bring as fathers is this external safety on a very a visceral level, because safety, you can't make someone feel safe by just telling them you're safe. It doesn't work that way. Our bodies are so attuned to the subtle signals of safety. And so if you want her to feel safe, you need to feel safe. Now that might seem simple because you're like, there's no wild animals where I live, but our bodies signal lack of safety in so many subtle ways. So for example, you're like, oh, I'm super stressed because I'm working so hard because I wanted to get everything done before the baby's born. And then, so I'm still thinking about this project and did I finish that? Now, those hormones are adrenaline and other hormones that are the same hormones you would get if you weren't safe. So that's signaling to her, it's not safe. Whether you're in, 2025 in a birth room, in a hospital somewhere, at home, or in a cave, same body, same signals of safety. And you can't just go, okay, I'm on the day of the birth, suddenly I'm going to become a non-stressed, lovely safe zone for my partner. Something that has to start beforehand.
The body's already used to it being not safe. It doesn't just turn off, I'm safe now.
Exactly, right? So all of the nervous system practices, all of the deeper, breath work, qigong, nervous system stuff, like all physically moving your body, like all the practices that bring anyone into regulation is going to help bring a man into regulation so that he's not getting to that birth space in a stressed way. Then there needs to be the connection between the partners so that he is her safe zone, so that real sense of safety, so that her physical body, which is where birthing happens, but through the mind, can allow that sense of safety so she can let go and give birth. And that role is huge. Like the difference a man makes, we know in the birth space, like as someone who's attended thousands of births and helped thousands of couples through the pregnancy process, the difference that you can make in the birth space and all around the whole birth. It's not just the moment of birth, but it's even going into labor, because there needs to be a sense of safety even to allow that process to start. How painful it is. All of those things you can make a difference on as a man.
I'm curious. Out of the thousands of births you've been at and delivering all these babies, have you seen a correlation of how the relationship is like as you're working with them? And then if, let's say, the relationship was tough, a lot of drama, and then you see what's happening to birth, is there a direct correlation of how the relationship is between a man and a woman and how their birth is?
That's a tricky one. I have seen beautiful relationships have really difficult births. So that's not the only factor. But I find when the relationship is challenging, if it's going to be a good birth, what has to happen is the woman has to sort of go inside and create her own safe zone. And then so that becomes less of a connecting experience for the couple. So the birth, instead of the birth being like, wow, we did this beautiful thing, it's like she has to create her own zone of safety. But I've certainly seen the most beautiful connected relationships still have challenging births because so many factors involved in that birth. But it's hard when the relationship is hard for the birth to be perfectly smooth. It just makes it harder because you are so ultimately vulnerable in birth. It really is the most vulnerable you'll ever be in your life. Like you can't just run away. You're literally giving birth to an infant who's completely vulnerable. And so to have your main person who's supposed to be, who's literally 50% genetically of that baby, to have them be disconnected or a source of stress or pain just makes it hormonally harder. And then anything that makes it emotionally harder, makes it hormonally harder, makes it physically harder.
I'm just thinking through the two births that we had with my partner. And the first one was very tough. Mm-hmm. And it was just because of our inexperience. We went into it we were in Germany at the time. This was during COVID, like I told you, and there's only one, she wanted to give a home birth, and there was only one available at that time. It was our only choice, so she came, and during the talks, it was all fine. And Anya mentioned to her, hey, I would like to have, like the curtains down and more dark environments. I like to go focus more inwards. And then at first she said, yeah, sure, no problem. And then when the birth was actually happening, I remember she, it was in the room. I was with Anya at first, and it was going pretty smooth. And then when she got in, it was very German in some ways. And now when she got in, she's like, okay, yeah. She turned on the blinds and let the light in so that she can see her notepad, so she can start taking notes and doing these things. And then she was constantly asking her questions. And then in my mind, I was just like, I think we should just let her be. But then she's kind of like the professor. She's done this quite a number of times. Okay, fine. I guess this is how it's supposed to be done. And then, and then eventually, I don't know what was going on, because she, from her experience, she's done a lot of these. And there was a period where she was like, okay, the baby's almost coming out. You can push now. So Anya was pushing and pushing and pushing for a good, 30, 40 minutes. And then afterwards, she was exhausted. And then shortly after, they recheck to see, and they find out, oh, wow, it's still far away. So it was quite distressing, and we had to bring her to the hospital. And fortunately, from the hospital, it wasn't too long after. But, comparing that to the second birth, and we're like, you know what? We're going to go in our own rhythm. We're not really going to trust these, quote unquote, we will to a certain extent, but we kind of understand our flow. And then we actually did it at a hospital, but it was a unique hospital where they allow you, they have the, what do you call it? The hot tub, but
the birthing pool.
The birthing pools, they have that there. And it was much better because we were there, and then the doctors just said, okay, do your thing. And it was just me and her in the birthing pool, and I was just supporting her. She was saying, press here. She was breathing through the process. And just after a couple hours or so, the doctor just came in to check what's going on and say, okay, you're pretty much ready to go. And then she sat on the table, and just like a couple squeezes, and boom.
Amazing.
And it was such a different experience between the two. And I think it's going back to what you were saying previously about, knowing yourself and really getting much more in tune with your own body.
Yeah, and trusting that.
Trusting it.
Because I love your instincts with that of going, wait, I don't think she should be talked to, because we know that the neocortex, this front part of our brain, it has to quiet down when you're in labor. You have to go into that primal self, and it's like you both knew that instinctively, and that process was it can be disturbed by light, it can be disturbed by questions, because it forces that part of the brain to think, and then your primal self, which is just doing the work of labor, it gets in a little bit of a fight. So there's part of the body that goes into, okay, I have to engage the neocortex, but that's going to move away from labor. And then part of the body is saying, no, it's time to birth the baby. So you end up with a process that takes longer and is more painful. So, yeah. And it sounds like the second time you really trusted, okay, we've got this. And then they're there for support, rather than, okay, I'm going to listen to you from the outside as my main wisdom.
What do you think about people that struggle to get pregnant? How does this all play in? Because we were talking about how the man, one of the roles is to help their partner feel safe. You also mentioned about, for the woman, you need to feel safe. If not, the baby's not going to come; it's just going to stay in there. But how about the pregnancy process?
Yeah. Well, I think firstly, there's so many factors that come in. So many. I mean, our world, you think of our world 20 or 30 years ago compared to now, just in terms of pollution and EMFs, and, we have all of these things that we don't really know the impact. So there's a lot of physical things. But on a biological level, even for getting pregnant, there does need to be a certain amount of safety in the body. right? Just plain old safety. And I do find this is not something there's research on at all, because again, it's one of those really subtle factors. But in my experience doing preconception, because I do a lot of preconception work, and until the woman finds some kind of safety deep inside, which could be in relation to the relationship, it could be in relation to her life, or it could be purely within herself, it's hard for conception to happen. And, it's interesting because we see, young women, say, getting pregnant who are, doing whatever, not even thinking about it, getting pregnant. But then we have a huge amount, like a lot of women struggling to get pregnant at the moment. And because infertility is very high, some of that is because women are having babies older, but it's not just that. And when I'm working in these sessions, what I do find is that sense of safety is still key. And it does make sense, because why would the body continue this species if it's not feeling safe? If it's feeling like there's something not safe about this life, it's probably not going to say, okay, yeah, great, go have a baby, get you pregnant, because it's still unknown conception, right? It's still not something that we know exactly even how it happens. I mean, a few years ago, we used to say, there was this fight, sperm would come in and they would fight, and then they'd attack.
I was about
the
to say
egg,
that,
right?
Isn't it supposed to be so, I don't know what mechanical is the word, but and then people go, whoa, it's not working because, my sperm count is too low, or, your eggs are bad. It's like,
yeah, but we know now that there's something more to it. And for example, with that, like that sort of old mentality of like, it's a competition. Right. So we know now that these sperm come in and they prepare the egg, and then the egg opens to the right sperm that comes in. So it's completely the opposite of what we thought. It's actually the egg that chooses, it appears, the sperm that's going to come, or who knows, maybe there's a divine choice, whatever it is, but it's not a fight.
It's not whoever's the fastest swimmer.
It's not the fastest, it's not the strongest, it's none of that. It's something else that happens, and then when that something else happens, the egg opens and that particular sperm can enter, and only that sperm.
Is that a new finding? Because for such a long time, it was always like the fastest one is going to win the race.
There's all these jokes of like,
I know. Yeah, it's a new finding.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. It makes so much sense as well. And
doesn't it?
And also when you're talking about like women not able to get pregnant because of the safety factor, it makes a lot of sense. Just like, I'm just thinking biologically, if you're not safe, that means that your body's in this fight or flight mode.
Yeah.
It's not, and all the chemicals that's being released is not really meant to bring more life. It's meant to like, I'm going to run as fast as I can, or I'm going to have to attack or do something, right? And so why would the body prepare or allow that to happen?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I guess one kind of counter to all this would be in a case of, let's say, for example, in those very vicious experiences of women being raped, and then in those instances, they become pregnant.
I mean, there's so many cases of women getting pregnant in circumstances either like that are horrific, or they absolutely haven't planned it, or, they're, who knows, like addicted to drugs and in a completely unsafe. So there's definitely more to it.
Yeah.
With the population I tend to work with in terms of preconception, it's people saying, I'm choosing to have a baby. Either I've been trying for a few years, and I haven't been able to, or I have a lot of people come to me that say, like, I've done all the physical things. Like I've done, nutrition and exercise and herbs, and, I've done all of this, still not getting pregnant. And that seems to be the factor, but for sure it's something more. I think a lot of things in life are like that, where we don't really have an explanation. It doesn't, like, why do some people get pregnant and other people that have planned it so much aren't able to? But I do find in the work that I do, that's what I see, is this sort of sense of ease comes into the body. And that's when, and this is what women have fed back to me as well. It's like, oh, I actually feel like I can receive a baby now, or I feel safe enough, or my relationship feels safe enough, or my life, feels like it's settled enough that I'm actually can bring this in. But it is often that deep inner sense of safety more than something on the outside. Mm.
What about so I often have I work with students that are a lot of women, some men, a lot of women, and a lot of them have kids that are grown up already. Teenagers, some are in their 20s. We talked about how there's inner work being done, that's needed for somebody who's conceiving a child. What about ones that have kids that are already grown up? Is it important for them to pay attention to connecting deeper within their body? And if so, what's the purpose?
Yeah, it's actually a question I get a lot, or sometimes I get it when I'm working with somebody in pregnancy and I meet the mother of the woman who's pregnant and she's like, okay, I have all this trauma. What can I do now? Or, the woman who's pregnant says, I have all this trauma from when I was born. And sometimes I'll work intergenerationally. But it's a question I get from women and men, but mostly women say they're like, my child is, 10, 15, 20, 30, whatever. And there's a few things with it. One is it's never too late to do the work. And the most amazing thing I found over and over again is that when people do their own inner work and heal traumas, what happens is their relationship, if the trauma has to do with somebody else, their relationship with that person changes, even if that other person does no work. And I've had that with so many times with people, say with their children, they're say they had a traumatic birth, and they feel like, maybe they all these things went wrong in that child's pregnancy, birth, maybe later in their life as well. Doing the healing work in the here and now changes that, even though it happened 15 or 20 years, 30 years ago. And one of the reasons for that on a body level is that the limbic part of our brain, which is the part that processes emotions and the way we experience emotions, it doesn't record time. So, the neocortex has a record of time, let's say, but some parts of the brain have no experience of time. So when you do, say we're working with you with an event that happened 20 years ago, your limbic part of your brain then resets everything because it doesn't record time like that. So it's like, oh, that trauma is now integrated, let's say. So then it changes everything else around that integrated trauma. And so healing, in a sense, even when we're healing in the past, it happens in the here and now in terms of how we process or experience things. And a similar thing happens, I find, when people are working with things from the past, that it's like, yes, that happened a long time ago, but the healing happens now. And the number of times, I mean, even in the last few weeks, I've had this happen numerous times where somebody says, we say we worked with something with their mother, birth trauma thing, recent one, or a baby thing, or something about their child. You say a child that's still at home. Like a recent one was a woman went home, called me and said, what did you do to my 4-year-old? Because she said it's even the way her 4-year-old looked. We had worked on their trauma, their birth trauma, very traumatic birth. Even the way her 4-year-old looked to her when she got home was different. The way she behaved towards her was different. We hadn't done anything with the 4-year-old, but something shifted so deeply in the mother that it shifted. So did the 4-year-old change? Who knows? Probably not. But something in the way she was perceiving everything changed dramatically because she'd healed that trauma in herself or integrated that trauma that had happened.
Wow. Would this happen with somebody with older children as well?
Definitely. Yeah. I'm trying to think of a recent example from last year. Yeah. In a similar sort of way, I find once children are adults, or say over 25 or so, it doesn't seem to happen quite in the same way because they're less in your field. When they're living at home with you, it's a little bit different the way it happens. But I have had numerous times actually where somebody's done the work, or even a whole family has done work around, say, a challenging birth experience or something that happened a long time ago. And the adult children then express a desire to do their own work, or they're like, you know what, I'm ready to talk about that, or can we talk about this thing, from all that time ago. Or because what I've worked with many times is when you have someone that's pregnant, they had a traumatic birth, the mother is still traumatized, say, from that birth, or even if she doesn't recognize that she's traumatized, it's still that sense of, I don't want to think about it. It's not necessarily that she would say, oh, I had birth trauma. It's just more like, that was horrible. I don't want to think about it. And it's like it requires the mother sometimes to do that work so that the daughter, who's the one pregnant, can have her own integration and healing towards her own birth. So I find it's so worth it. It doesn't matter how old you are, for yourself or definitely for the whole family, that healing work. The integration of the things that have happened in the past. There's never a too late in my experience to do that integration of the experiences from the past.
It's like it never goes away. It doesn't just disappear.
Yeah.
We all have a mother, and most of us also have children, and so we're all connected.
Yeah. And even things like, say, you were not breastfed, but then you did a lot of your own research and so you were able to completely change that pattern for your own children. Had you not, it would be more likely you'd have children, your wife wouldn't breastfeed, because we know that dads are a huge influence on breastfeeding. So even that sort of, we could call it a trauma or an experience from the past, you not being breastfed, impacts potentially your own children, because you're in subtle and big ways, you're less likely to encourage your wife to breastfeed, and you're more likely to encourage not to breastfeed or to encourage stopping if you haven't done the work. And some of that is knowledge, like you said, like finding all the benefits, and some of it is any traumas that might be held there, even if they're subtle. So it's even in those little ways, like breastfeeding, that those impacts happen generation to generation.
And how do you usually help people through these type of traumas?
Yeah. So in my one-to-one work, I do a combination of modalities. So with energy psychology, something called internal family systems, and just somatic intelligence, like really the intelligence of the body, because we're not these separate pieces that are mind, body, energy, emotions, spirituality. It's all connected. So I do a combination of modalities depending on what's needed, because I've been obviously working with this for a very long time, in a way that brings that deep safety, because in a sense we all have the ability to heal in ourselves, right? It's not like I or anyone else can go in and heal something in somebody else, but often there needs to be a sense of safety or a space that's very tightly held, so that you can feel safe enough to touch upon, say, those parts that even the little boy that wasn't breastfed, that little baby may still be carried in there, may or may not be a trauma. It's not necessarily a trauma, but these parts of us are held inside. And so it's creating that space that people can actually go in, meet the parts of themselves that are in pain, or we could call them wounded, and realize that they're not wounded, they are whole, and to bring that wholeness in. And there are lots of very specific ways to do that, in a one-to-one way or in a group setting as well.
I have some specific questions of how certain births are done, and what your thoughts are on it. So the first one is sitting up versus laying down. Mm-hmm. I hear many people talk about sitting up, right, being upright, as a natural position, all that. Why do most hospitals and most mainstream medical ways of doing it, it's like everybody's laying down?
Yeah, it's amazing that is still happening. In the history of birth, in the history of humanity, it's a relatively short time that laying down has been really become the norm. One of the reasons, which is so crazy, and it sounds crazy to even say out loud, is it's easier as a practitioner. If you have somebody on a table sitting at the right height and their legs are back, and you can just do this. I remember once years ago working with his obstetrician and the woman, it was actually an amazing story. She'd had a lot of trauma earlier, and we'd done different modalities right there in the middle of labor because she was about to have a cesarean. But actually she was here in Indonesia. And so I was working with her because her family didn't have any money. So there really wasn't another option. She had to give birth because transferring was going to be this horrible traumatic thing. Anyway, so we worked through this trauma, and then it was time for her to give birth. And there was an obstetrician visiting who wanted to be the one to receive the baby. And she was squatting beside the bed, and he was like, what do I do? What do I do? You know, he'd never attended a birth other than lying on the back, and he just couldn't believe. I mean, he was great. He kind of got under the bed and caught the baby eventually, but she was squatting down beside. But he said he'd just never seen that before, and he couldn't believe how much easier it was, because it just makes sense. Like, why would you ever lie on your back and push a baby uphill? Because the pelvis, goes like this, so up to the sacrum. So then you actually literally have to push the baby uphill. And then of course you're more likely to tear, to have a tear in the opening because you're pushing the baby uphill. And so it's not physiological. But the two main reasons are preference of the practitioner. And the other one is because, 100 and some years ago, women started having drugs in labor. And when you're given drugs in labor, you can't be moving around anymore. And so you need to be on your back. So there was a whole period of time in Western birthing where women were given drugs that completely knocked them out, and then the babies were pulled out with forceps. And that's just how it was done in some parts of the world. And so those reasons have sort of just persisted as the way it is. In my practice, I have almost never had someone give birth on their back by choice, which means they just don't. Because the only times I have are when it's like it's so ingrained in their mind that this is how you should give birth. And then it's almost like I've had to say, is that really where you want to be, And then they've moved into another position, but I don't really experience that. So some of the reasons physiologically that you don't want to be on your back is your pelvis is 30% smaller. Like the actual size of the opening is 30% smaller when you're lying flat on your back, compared to, say, if you're in a semi-squatting position. And if you think 30%, and then you have all these babies that are
you're trying to make it easier.
Yeah, and they're going into distress, or women are being told your baby can't fit through your pelvis. But the only difference might be changing the position so there's more mobility in the whole pelvis. I mean, it's sort of crazy when you think about it. Like, you think that can't possibly be still happening, and yet it is. Because almost every movie still has either they're on their back or they're in that sort of semi-sitting position, where all the weight's right on the pelvis, sitting on the sacrum. Everything's being squished in, making that smaller pelvis. But that's what we see in terms of birth, because we're not seeing, aunties and sisters and everything giving birth. So we're seeing Hollywood, we're seeing movies and TV episodes, and everyone's just screaming, push, and she's lying on her back, or she's in that sitting position, like not an upright position, but where there's pressure on the pelvis. And so that's our visual of this is how birth is.
And you mentioned that a lot of this happened because it was necessary because they were on drugs.
They're on drugs. Yeah. Yeah.
And then if we trace it back, the reason why why would a reason, like, it's obvious, right? Like, I'm a man, so I've never had kids, but it's obvious that there's discomfort, right? There's discomfort, there's pain. Why is it that many women don't use drugs and they can have babies, while the others are like, there's just no way I could have did it without it? Why is that? Like, is it just I can endure more pain than someone else, or there's something else to it?
I think there's a lot to it. And it's very multifaceted. Some of it is, past traumas. If you have any trauma in your pelvic area, especially if it's associated with pain in the past, and then you have a baby coming through, which is painful, it's going to trigger those old traumas. So some of it is trauma. Some of it is purely physical. Somebody fell off their bike when they were 10 years old, and it did something in their pelvis, and it's never corrected itself. And so their pelvis is sitting in a way that it's going to be really painful when they go into labor, unless they get some work done on it, something deeper to shift that. Some of it is emotional. When they were born themselves, like when they were being born, maybe their mother was in extreme pain, or there were high emotions, and so that sensation of birthing is associated with trauma, and that's what's in their cellular memory is trauma. It could be that one person has a beautiful supporting partner who's making them feel deeply safe, which gives hormones of safety and gives them high endorphin levels, and endorphins connect to the same receptors of morphine, and they give you a sense of well-being, and they get really strong during labor. So one person might have all this support where all those endorphins are being flooded and they feel really good. And another person has, from the outside, no support, disconnection, indifference, criticism. And so their hormones are fight or flight, which creates no endorphins, more pain. So there are so many different factors that are all sort of coming into play in that moment. Do they have somebody turning on all the lights and talking, or do they have someone creating a soothing environment around that woman who's birthing? So all of those things are coming into play at the same time, impacting. It's not often when there's a space where women are really beautifully supported. My personal experience is it's very rare that pain relief is needed. It hasn't in 28 years, it hasn't come up yet as the reason for, say, to transfer to a more medicalized environment, because I need pain relief. That's how rare it can be in a when I'm talking about a population of people who are very well supported and prepared for the experience. So yeah, there's a lot of factors. It's definitely not just simply one person can endure it, because people have such high pain thresholds, but the intensity of labor, when all of those other factors, whether it's previous traumas, not feeling supported, the external environment is giving them adrenaline, the pain level is through the roof. It's not something that can just be endured, but that exact same person can be in a different environment with different support or different internal factors, preparation or internal sense of safety, and not experience that same level of pain. So it's not, I just am so cautious about making it sound like, oh, some women can just handle it and some women can't. It's not like that. It's all of these different things coming together that makes it an experience that is, something that she feels like, yes, I can move through this powerfully without needing medication, or actually the best thing I can do for myself right now is to take something because it's too much for me.
This reminded me of something I just created posted a video on recently. I call it the double negative effect, and it's where, let's say, you stub your toe or something, and now your toe hurts. So as of right now, it's the pain coming from the toe, it's throbbing. Now, a lot of times what happens is that's the first negative, right? My toe hurts. And then the double negative is when somebody now, let's say, gets angry at the fact that they stubbed their toe. So then the sensation of anger, the pressure and the tension, now that's added on to the first experience of pain, which makes the overall pain more intense. And then now, let's say, now they get fearful because they have to go into a meeting, and know that they're not going to do well in the meeting because they're upset. And so now they're afraid that they're going to do bad at this meeting, whatever they need to do. So they have fear on top of the anger, on top of the original pain. And so I'm kind of seeing that same idea, like physiology, like why is our body's preparing for the birth, and we can handle and endure a lot of pain and discomfort, especially because the body's made to birth. But if trauma isn't processed, then there's all of these traumas that we're actually experiencing, the pressure and the tension and the discomfort coming from traumas and not from the actual physical process of birth, but the traumas we're experiencing. So all of this stacked up becomes this
layers,
crazy, intense experience that a person can't handle.
Yeah. And then I find nowadays the other layer that comes on, similar to that, is So let's say they've been on Instagram and they're like, I'm going to have the most beautiful birth. It's going to be orgasmic. It's not going to be painful. And then it is intense. And then, so it's like, that's their stub toe. Like they're experiencing the intensity, but then they're like, no, it shouldn't be intense. So then they're upset, angry, like sad, guilty, all these different feelings because it's painful. So then they're like, something's wrong because it's painful. And then they're upset at themselves for feeling like something's wrong, so they're just layering. But actually just the acceptance of, oh, this is the intensity. Like, okay, I stubbed my toe, or okay, this is really intense right now, takes away the double, triple, quadruple negatives that keep getting piled on there. Yeah, it's huge actually.
Just curious, is orgasmic birth an actual thing, or is it? Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, I think my most liked Instagram reel ever was on orgasmic birth and orgasm. Yeah. So there's a few different sort of areas around orgasmic birth. Some women literally experience like an orgasm, like as in there's the contractions and the physical, like the physicality of an orgasm. And sometimes that's incredibly pleasurable. Sometimes it's not so pleasurable, but it's like they're experiencing an orgasm, but it's not necessarily pleasurable. And some women will have an extremely pleasurable birth, but not physically have an orgasm. But it's because the baby moves through some of those same structures. And so I find I don't usually like to talk too much about orgasmic birth just because people get attached to, I'm going to have an orgasm in labor, and either they hate that idea or they love that idea. But really it's about creating pleasure around, because pain and pleasure also are there's a thin line often between pain and pleasure, especially when we're talking about that part of the body. And the more women that can expand their actually ability to feel pleasure and to hold pleasure, the more likely it is that experience can go on towards the side of pleasure. Because many women can experience birth pleasurably, even if it's intense. Like, it doesn't mean it's perfectly not, it still can be painful or intense and pleasurable at the same time. So often all of those can be either at the same time or different parts of it that are pleasurable and different parts that are more in the intense side.
Which reminds me of like people that enjoy rough sex. It's rough, so it's painful in some places, but in some ways. But obviously people do it because it's pleasurable.
Yeah.
Would you say it's kind of like that?
Sure. I just genuinely don't know. It could be. I think with birth, it's often that the little difference would be often that is adrenaline based. So it's a little bit unsafe, can give pleasure for some people because it puts them off balance. And so, whereas in birth, when it's very pleasurable, it's because endorphins are very, very high. And it's actually because the more intensity there is, the more endorphins get produced, which would be the same in that situation. So pain would give more endorphins. I'm not sure. I'd be curious. Someone would have to sort of research brain. You need to be hooked up to all sorts of monitors in different both situations and see what's going on in the brain there. Yeah. But yeah, with birth, it's often that the pleasure hormones get so high that even if the intensity is there, it doesn't matter. So the pleasure isn't in relation to the pain, because I know some people that enjoy, say, really rough sex. It's like the more painful it is, the more pleasurable it is. That's not usually what I find with women in birth. It's that the pleasure is so strong that even though there's pain, it doesn't matter.
Oh.
Yeah.
And with the release of all these pleasure hormones, they don't need the synthetic ones.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, endorphins, which is our natural, painkillers, they're 300 times stronger than morphine, and they attach to the same receptors as morphine does. And so, and what happens in pregnancy is you build up this bank at the end of pregnancy ready to release during labor, but the circumstances need to be right. So you can imagine, let's say through your pregnancy, you're taking space to really connect, to feel good, to do things that make you feel good, hopefully to connect with your partner. It's much more likely you're going to have a ready bank. I mean, I'm calling it a bank. It's not literally a bank, but a ready supply of these endorphins, because your body builds them up more and more and more at the end of pregnancy. Then when you go into labor, if there's enough sense of safety, then that just gets released. So the more the pain comes up, the endorphins come up to match it. Pain comes up, the endorphins come up to match it. So even though it might be quite intense, your experience of it can be either all the way to pleasurable or just neutral, because your body's flooded, your brain is flooded with hormones that make you feel good. And that is how it's designed to be. It's actually how it's supposed to be. We know that because the more undisturbed the process is, the more endorphins women have, and generally the less pain they experience. And so when we can see when a process is undisturbed, that's usually sort of the ultimate of that, let's say, of that experience. And the more undisturbed it is, whether through internal factors or external factors, the more endorphins and pleasure hormones there are.
And speaking of like undisturbed, when we were in the birthing for my baby, it was there wasn't much of things that you were heavily doing. We were just letting Natalia kind of just get into our own groove, and I just remember you and I were going back and forth with like, putting pressure on her when needed and grabbing something if she needs. And I would go, and then I'm tired and I sit down, and then you would jump in and you would go, and then I would bring some tea. But it was just, it felt like, for me, it just felt like a hangout. Like it was like, we're there as a strong intention, of course, but it wasn't this intense situation, and we were just allowing it to happen.
Yeah.
And the low lighting, it was nice. That's why I shared it on social.
You say it was nice. Was it nice for Natalia?
Yeah, I said the first one was nice too, This one was, I felt, even nicer. I mean, because it was like the middle of the night, and we lit up the candles, got the teas ready, I've got the mushroom drinks, got some snacks. I remember we had some dates and some almonds, and we're just like, okay, we had some nice little music playing in the background. It was just super chill. I think Natalia said it was easier, this one.
Second time.
Yeah, because she didn't push like she did in the first one, and so not really. Yeah, because I remember the first one, she's like, "Oh, it's ready. Okay, push," and she didn't do that, so there's no tear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And she was just so amazingly centered the whole time.
Yeah.
She was just so beautiful.
Yeah.
And her recovery was so, I mean, right after the birth, it's just like perfectly feeling great.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was amazing.
Yeah.
And I think birth ultimately is like both you and her just had such a deep trust and have such a deep trust of the process. And so that automatically brings safety. It automatically allows all the hormones to work well because there's that sense of, okay, this is okay. Whatever's happening, this is okay. And that deep sense of trust is probably the biggest single factor. If I could just gift something to everybody, it would be just that sense of trust in the body, that the body can do this. It's part of life. It is in a sense just a normal part of life. Like you said, it's hanging out. It's just being in a process. It's a very sacred and beautiful process, but it is also just a process, a bodily process. And that deep trust in that the body can do this is such a gift and is what allows often it to go the way it did.
Right. If somebody wants to learn more about what you do, where can they go?
So I have a Instagram, Conscious Birth Community, and I share hopefully inspirational things in there. And I have a free birth masterclass on there. Also some resources for dads as well. You mentioned that. And so that's a great place. And then I have a little landing page just at lianneschwartz.com as well.
Okay.
And I'm always happy for people to contact me.
Okay.
I get messages from all around the world, people going, this is happening or that's happening. If somebody just has a question and they're like, hey, this is what I'm dealing with, I may not be able to help directly, but I may be able to direct them where to go with that. Or it might be something that I can help with. So you can always reach out.
Well, I know that what you do is so valuable, and the things that you teach are so aligned. With me helping students, when I hear you talk about how to approach it, it's like complete alignment.
Oh, I love that. In some of the things I've seen of yours, it's just the emotions and the body and the nervous system and breath and movement, it's very aligned. All of this work really, that coming into alignment with our life, coming into alignment with birth, with parenthood. Yeah, it's all very similar.
Okay. So then we'll leave all the links somewhere in the video for everybody to contact.
Yeah, fabulous.
All right. Well, thank you for coming and sharing with us everything. It's been such a pleasure. It's been such a pleasure for not just today, but for the whole process that we've had, and all the things that I've got to learn. Even though it's on the same things, but it's totally different perspective, and it's so fascinating. It's so fascinating, and I love it, because I have conversations with people that ask me, and I know what I know, but there are so many things that are just entirely, it's different. And I love the fact that they all join together with the need to be able to connect deeper within, process the old stuff. And whether it's birthing, whether it's everyday life, somebody already had children or wanting to go ahead and conceive, there's always some fundamental things that needs to happen. We need to be peaceful and calm inside. We need to clear the stuff that don't belong. And when we do, everything that we want happens easier, more smoother.
So true. Yeah. Thank you. It's been fun. I mean, I could talk about this stuff all day. It's great.
All right. Thank you, Lianne.
Thank
you so much.